Okay, good evening. Let's make a start. So the Chasam Sofer says that Parsha Balak is completely unique. It's not the only one who says this. Completely unique in the whole Torah, right? Because he says in every single other part of the Torah, every other parsha, we ourselves or our ancestors are Eidei Re'iyah. You know, we're witnesses to it. A description of events that we saw or our ancestors saw, whether it's Mitzrayim, whether it's the Kriyas Yamsuf, whether it's Matan Torah, everything. The only exception to this is Parsha Balak, where we have a description of a discussion between a king and Bilam, and this sorcerer who comes to his land, or the whole description, why he comes, who brings him, the whole story of building the Mizbeach, or the 7 Mizbechos, all of this thing is all of this is entirely the entire description that we have of it is from the Torah itself, from the word of Hashem. That's exactly where it comes from. And he points out the Chasam Sofer as a result of this. He says like this, he says the following words, someone who believes in the whole Torah and all the mitzvahs in every aspect, but he just has a doubt about this one parsha. He says, who knows, who says, maybe it happened, maybe it did, yeah, just a doubt. That's a denial of the fundamental of our faith. So there is something, and we'll come back to this hopefully a little bit later on, that particular aspect of how central this is to our emunah. But we have to understand that we are deriving things from this parsha which are perhaps unique to the whole Torah. They're unique to the whole Torah because the parsha is unique. It really stands out, and it's on its own. It goes out, and it's unlike anything else. I'm going to focus here. The overall approach that I'd like to look at is this notion of the power of words and how that features in the parsha and what we can learn from it. I'd like to begin with a sforno, which, if you're following in the Chumash, is on Perek Chof Beis Pasuk Chof Ches, and this really the Sforno wants to address and understand the notion of the Piha Oso, of the donkey opening its mouth to speak, right? And the reason why this is surprising, apart from the fact that donkeys don't normally speak, is the fact that we understand that this is one of the things that was created on Erev Shabbos Bein Hashmoshes. It was a special and unique thing that was created, that the osa and the donkey should speak in order to have this conversation with Bilam. All there ready from the beginning of creation that this would transpire. The problem is, as Chaim Shmulevitz and others highlight, is that if you think about the story for a moment, you realize that it's not even entirely clear why the donkey was necessary, right? Why that whole piece about the conversation between Bilam and the donkey didn't need to transpire, right? Because at the end, ultimately, Balak sends to Bilam and asks him to go to curse the Bnei Yisrael. He ends up going to the Bnei Yisrael. He says he can only say what Hashem tells him to say, which is exactly what happens. He ends up giving the brachos because that's what Hashem tells him to say. So you could take out, you know what I mean? You could remove from the parsha, you with me? Like this whole piece of that whole section, that whole piece, that whole conversation between Bilam and his donkey, and the parsha itself would still refine the story, would still transpire in the same way. Says Chaim Shmulevitz, and we'll come to this for in a second, but Chaim Shmulevitz gives us a very important perspective on this. He says, you see from here, that the whole purpose of the donkey and the creation of that donkey being able to speak on Erev Shabbos Bein Hashmoshes was for one purpose alone, to give Bilam a chance to stop, to give Bilam a chance, to give him a chance to stop, to give him a chance to change what he was going to do with his words, with his speech, right? The whole piece there, the whole purpose of it was another thing that was thrown in his path, right? He has the dream, Hashem speaks to him in the dream, and he has this conversation with this donkey, with the oso, to give him a chance to turn around and not to continue on his way. But nevertheless, he does, and he's warned that this happened, that Hashem will, and he can only say what he's allowed to say, etc. So you see from here, on a basic level, that Hashem changes the whole world the natural order of the whole of existence, just to give this one person a chance to change his intentions, to change his path, to do tshuva. It's a remarkable lesson, right? The whole natural order of the world is changed to give him one more opportunity to do the right thing. Now the Sforno says like this: "Vayiftach Hashem es piha osen." Perek beis pasuk ches. Noson bo koach ledaber. Hashem gave the osen, the donkey, the ability to speak. Ke'inyan Hashem seposai tiftach. In other words, the phrase "Vayiftach Hashem es piha osen," Hashem opened the mouth of the osen, is the same idea as Hashem seposai tiftach. Hashem opened my lips, so we begin davening. What was the purpose of this? Similarly to how as Reb Chaim Shmulevitz explains, Sforno is saying the whole purpose was simply that he should have the ability to do tshuva. And this, I think, is the most powerful phrase used by the Sforno. B'zochroi, through recalling, in other words, through what happens with the donkey, ki me'Hashem ma'aneh lo shoim, gam lebilti mucha, that Hashem is the one who guides speech. The way speech is delivered is guided by Hashem, even through something which is completely not appropriate, for which speech is not appropriate, right? It's not appropriate, it's not normal, it's not natural for a donkey to speak. Yet Hashem decides that a donkey should speak, and the donkey should speak, and the donkey does speak. And the message is for Bilam, much more so, that he can remove it from the one who is prepared to speak. Mucha means prepared. The one who is naturally able to speak, a human being, if Hashem decides that should be the case. And all this existed simply so that a person like him, someone of his stature, should not waste his life, shouldn't throw his life away. The message, says the Sforno of the donkey speaking, is that Hashem is sending him a message and saying, if I can give speech even to something which is not within the frame of speaking at all, I'm also going to be able to remove that ability to speak in the way you wish to speak, right? That idea and what the Sforno is doing here is he's paraphrasing that very, very beautiful posuk in Tehillim, Mishlei, which we quote, of course, in our davening on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which is Lo Odom Ma'ar Chelev, right? Me Hashem Ma'aneh Lo Shoy, right? Lo Odom Ma'ar Chelev, but from Hashem, what Ma'ar Chelev means that we organize and we think through what we want to say. That's where we have an area of choice. But the response, the way it comes out, the way we speak, that is something which is guided by Hashem. And that is something which Hashem directs in every respect. The completion of that action is actually directly from Hashem. That was the message that Bilam was supposed to have learned from, but of course he did not. Of course he did not. He didn't. Of course he didn't do so. Of course he didn't do so. Now, let's try and understand something about what is going on here in terms of the donkey, the speaking of the donkey, because this is, apart from as I said, apart from the fact that it seems to be completely out of place, the fact that that a donkey speaks and why that had to exist, and as we said, in order to give Bilam that opportunity to do tshuva, there seems to be somehow a link here between the one other episode in the Torah where an animal speaks out of turn. Right, that's a good quiz question, right? What was it? Snake. Yeah, the Nachash, right? There seems to be a link. There must somehow be a link here between the two that speak, right? You have the donkey that speaks here to Bilam, and the Nachash opens its mouth and speaks to Chava. What is the common denominator between the two? In both cases, the human being does something completely unexpected, which is, engages in dialogue. The last thing you would expect the person to do, right, when an animal speaks to the person, is to respond as if it's a normal conversation, right? Right, he carries on, it says, and says to Bilam, right, because you've made fun of me, you treated me inappropriately, and I would have killed you if I had the opportunity. No, shock horror. There's an osso and there's a donkey speaking, but he responds. Okay, he responds. So Rav Mordechai Miller Zichron Levracha from Gateshead, in his Shabbos Shurim, he has a piece about this. He doesn't expressly link the donkey speaking to the Nochash speaking, to the snake speaking, but he does use the whole episode of what transpired in Gan Eden to explain and understand how and how we are to understand Bilam's actions. You know, how Bilam, such a clever man, he's someone who we know is on that very sort of high level of nevuah. He's able to communicate with Hashem, as we know, and nevertheless, he doesn't see the message that if there's a donkey talking to him, he should be so shocked, he should turn around and go back and just give up the whole enterprise. And yet he doesn't do so. He continues and he goes into disaster. So Ramon Chamela refers to an idea from Chaim Parsha, which Rav Dessler expounds on. And he says that what transpires at the moment of the Chet of Adam Harishon is that you have, before that Chet, right, the notion of Tov and Ra, good and evil, right, were completely distinct and separate, okay? And what happened as a result of the Chet, was they became mixed together, okay? The Rambam, he brings the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, who says that before the sin, before the Chet, right, the conceptions of good and evil didn't even really exist. There wasn't this good and evil, this Tov and Ra. There was simply truth and falsehood. There was emes and sheker. That's all there was. And what happened was the distinction between what was clearly emes and what is clearly sheker became blurred. And therefore, the whole notion of choice comes into being, because now you have relativism, is it good or is it good? Is it bad? I'm not sure. Dilemmas, bechira, free choice, right? That all comes into play as a result of the Chet of Adam Harishon. So Rav Dessler explains that as a result, what happens is there is a sense, he calls it a sense of proportion. You end up weighing one factor against another, so that, for example, you can have a situation where people lack proportion in the way they react to things. This is a central part of the blurring of boundaries. So you can have one person, for example, who is in complete despair over something, and someone else is completely optimistic about something. It all depends on perspective. He gives another example. You can have someone, he says, who has, let's say, a photographic memory, but as a result, focuses entirely on that aspect of their personality. They rely entirely on their memory, but they're very superficial inside. There's all everything becomes out of proportion. Similarly, he says, the notion of flattery. A person can be flattered in a way that they hear something that sounds wonderful to them. And what happens is the blurring and the confusion makes them really believe those compliments. And that means that they forget that they have to work on themselves and continue growing and everything else in life. So Ramon Chamela uses this to explain what transpired with Bilam here. He suffered from an extreme degree of a lack of proportion, okay? When it didn't concern himself, he could give this objective and balanced advice. But when the desire for prestige, for flattery came into play, or for silver and gold, they wave the silver and gold in front of his eyes, what happens is, he loses all ability to weigh the situation rationally. It's like the glitter of Balak's gold, completely throws him off balance. Okay, he suggests that maybe also his ingrained hatred of the Bnei Yisrael also throws him off balance. What happens is the voice, he loses the voice of reason, so that he can hear the malach, right, the angel speaking to him. He can hear the donkey speaking to him, and nevertheless, he completely ignores the message. Totally ignores it. All he sees when the donkey opens his mouth is an affront to his personal honor. That's all he sees. What does he say? You're treating me inappropriately. If there was a sword in my hand, I would have killed you. He's so blinded to the fact that he's talking to a donkey, right, that all he sees is the affront to his personal cover. That's all he sees. He sees nothing else. And that's why he says the Torah doesn't say anything about any surprise he may have felt at the phenomenon of a donkey talking. Why does the Torah not put emphasis on this? Because Bilam paid no attention to that. For Bilam, he was so consumed, he was so blurred, his vision was so confused and so blurred by, for example, by by the either whether it was the flattery he was receiving, whether it was the hatred, the ingrained hatred he had of the Bnei Israel, that he simply could not see he couldn't see what was going on in front of his eyes. And he quotes the famous Chazal in Baba Basra, where the Gemara says, it's actually based on a pasuk in last week's Parsha, that basically averas are generally, when we do something wrong, it's generally because of a lack of perspective, that we haven't made the right cheshbon, basically. We haven't weighed up. This is what happens, right? We don't weigh up the cost-benefit analysis, or if we do, we end up messing up the cost-benefit analysis because we're not looking at things in the right way, in the right proportions. We understand, yes, this is important, but this is more important. So my Yitzhak gets the better of me in this way because I'm out of balance. That's what it is. It's a lack of proportion. Okay, so I just think again, as I said, he doesn't mention the connection and the link to the Nachash, but I think that the striking connection is the human reaction in both cases is to act normally. Is not to say why you're speaking to me, because that's such an insight into human nature, is that we can be so blinded to what's in front of our eyes because of our own self-interest and in that way. So that's the idea that he says. Now, when it comes to further on in the parsha, when Bilam actually gets to say his piece, so there is a question as to how much autonomy Bilam has. Yeah, this is a good question, right? You understand? How much autonomy does Bilam have? Do you understand? Like when we talk about Hashem putting words in Bilam's mouth, what does that mean? Does that mean he's like an automaton? Is he like a recording device? That he doesn't actually have any. It's not him speaking. It's not him. He's the mouthpiece, but actually, it's not his words at all. So the Ramban says that can't be the case. There's a short Ramban here, Perek Chof Gimel Pasuk Hey, if you want to follow inside. The Ramban says, Yesh Meforshim, but it says, Vayosem Hashem Dovo B'fi Bilam. Hashem puts words in Bilam's mouth. Yesh Meforshim, says the Ramban, some explain, Ki lo yoda Bilam b'dvar. Didn't know anything what he was saying. Ach Hashem mole yosei dvarim, v'omer lo yishuv v'lo achos tabek yosei dvar b'picha. Basically, he had no idea what he was saying. Hashem said to him, go back to Bilam and just say these words. It's like he's programmed. You're programmed to say these words. V'ulai kein das Rabbi Seinu, he brings the Chazal in the Medrash Tanchuma, which says, Ikim es piv, mepikmo k'odom shekavea masmer beluach. Hashem sort of like twisted his mouth like a person puts like a nail in a board or something like that. Okay? So it's a complete programming in that way, right? Ve'eino nochon be'enai, says the Ramban. He says it's not correct. I don't see it this way, says the Ramban. But avur omroi, from the fact that the pasuk says Shemea Imri Kel, he is described as someone who hears the words of Hashem. Hashem achazei shakai yechazeh. He sees the vision of Hashem. So therefore, what does it mean by Yosem Hashem davar b'fi Bilam? What does it mean Hashem places word in the mouth of Bilam? Alatam by Yosem halomot, he says Shalimdoi hadvorim. Hashem taught him the words sheyigros osom b'fiv, that he should say them with his own mouth. V'lo yishkach, he shouldn't forget them. V'lo yapam lehem davo, he shouldn't leave anything out. Katam b'lamdo es b'nei Yisrael stimo b'fiyem, like the Torah says when it describes the end of Parsha Sefer Devarim, the writing of the Sefer Torah, and you should teach it to the Bnei Yisrael, and you should place the words in its mouth, words whether it's first the Torah or the Song of Hazinu. Okay, what is the Ramban, I think, trying to emphasize here? I think the Ramban is trying to say that Bilam cannot be absolved of responsibility for his speech. Even though Hashem is putting the words in his mouth, yeah, he is still the one. It is still considered his own speech. He still has that own essential responsibility for speech. And as a result, we learn that we in turn have a responsibility fundamentally for our speech. I think that's what the Ramban is trying to emphasize here. Don't absolve Bilam of what he says, right? Even though it ends up being positive because that's what he has to say. But he still bears ultimate responsibility for what comes out of his mouth, right? The power of words in every situation rests on the person who uses those words, who actually speaks those words. Now, there's an Orach Chaim which links the speech, the power of words of Bilam, with the words that Bnei Yisrael had spoken on many occasions, which served them, which were detrimental to them. If you look on Perek Chof Daled, Pasuk Tes Vov, sorry to jump around a little bit here, but Perek Chof Daled, Pasuk, actually, sorry, it's Aleph. My apologies. I think yes, Perek Chof Daled, Pasuk Aleph. Vayar Bilam, Chitov B'nei Hashem, Levarech Es Yisrael. Bilam sees that it's good in the eyes of Hashem to bless the Bnei Yisrael, and he doesn't get involved anymore in, maybe he'll try and involve himself in divination to try and work out the hocus pocus to try and work out whether or not he is, whether he's in the right place to try and curse them, etc., etc. And it says Vayoshes El Hamidbar Panov. Now we normally translate Vayoshes El Hamidbar Panov as he turns his face towards the midbar, towards the desert. The Meforshim struggle with this phrase because why is there a mention of the desert here? So the Targum, Onkelos, unusually gives a pshat. Targum says, "V'shavi lakovel iglod avod Yisrael b'mad parapoi." Right? He turns his face towards the egel azov that the Bnei Yisrael made in the desert. The idea being that through mentioning the sin of the egel hazov, somehow, maybe, that will allow him to curse the Bnei Yisrael. The Orach Chaim, though, gives a number of explanations. It's quite difficult to find because it's right in the middle. The Orach Chaim has often got very long pieces, and I just want to take out a tiny little piece. If you can find it, it begins with Dibra Maschel Oi, the word Oi. It is in Pasuk Aleph, and it's a couple of paragraphs in. And he says, Oi Yispayer Loshen Dibur. It can be that you can explain the phrase dibur, to speak, kederech shepiresh b'zoyah, as the Zohar explains it on the pasuk of Vinu Meis Bamidbar. Our father died in the desert with the daughters of Tzlafchad. Loshen dibur. Chazal explain that also means that also there refers to speech. That midbar doesn't here refer to desert, but it refers to speech. The hakavon, and the intention is then, according to this explanation, all of the 10 trials that the Bnei Yisrael test Hashem with, they all involve speech. If you think about it, it's quite a fascinating thing. Al Yamsuf, right? They turn around and they rebel there, so they say, what's going to happen to us? What's going to be with us, right? But Egel, with the Egel Azov, the Misonim, the complainers, Meraglim, Ba'das Korach, the Meriva, one after the other, they all involve somehow, they all involve a form of speech. They all sins with speech. So Bilam's intention is, amongst the people I'm looking at, facing in the mid here, the Bnei Yisrael, there must be a lot of them who have acted incorrectly with speech. They were involved in one or another of these episodes, and by therefore sort of bringing up this negative aspect, the negative speech that they were involved in, that's how he thought he would be able to curse them.
This is the next generation.
Partly. Yeah, absolutely. But he's looking at it and saying, well, there must be some there. Yeah, that's a fair point. But he's looking at it, I suppose, from his perspective and saying, well, there must be some people there who were involved. Yes, it's true that for another it was the next generation. But he's trying to sort of bring up that idea of the negative speech, and that allows him, that he feels that allows him to speak towards them. So again, you see from here as well this idea of the notion of words, the power that words can have, the effect that they can have. Because Bilam's whole attempt, according to the Orach Chaim, Bilam's whole attempt, really the whole Parsha, which is about speech and about words and trying to get them to curse, comes about because of the inappropriate use of words that the Bnei Yisrael have time and again done as they've gone through their journey, right? One final idea, just to share with you in the few minutes that we have left, to take a slightly different perspective on the notion of words, and that brings us back to that Chasam Sofer I mentioned at the beginning about the uniqueness of this parsha. This parsha existing, beyond than anything else. It exists of its own. It's on its own because we don't have any external reference to it. We only know of its existence through the Torah itself. There's a more in Brachos which says, Omer Rabbi Yavol ben Zutraisi, Omer Rabbi Yudah, I think it's Omer Rav, Bikshu Likva Parsha Balak b'Kriyas Shema. They wanted to institute the Parsha Balak would be said as part of Kriyas Shema. Why did they not institute it as part of the Shema? Because the trouble that's due to it's too long, basically, right? It would take us an awfully long time to say Parsha Balak the whole way through. Now, why Why? What's the connection between Parshas Balak and Krishma? What's the idea? So the Gemara brings out one pasuk. It bends down like a lion, and who can raise it up? Like I think it's Lavi, could be a lioness or another type of lion. Rashi says there. Shakodesh Baruch Hu, I think he brings it here as well. Shakodesh Baruch Hu, Shemrenu k'shachveinu v'shachveinu v'kameinu, lishkav shalom shkeitim kariach lavi. There is the connection to Shema is that these words about lying down and getting up like a lion is like v'shachvav kumech. It's like going to sleep and rising up again. That's the connection. So the obvious question is, for that one pasuk, that connection between when you go to sleep and when you get up in the morning, that means the whole of Parshas Balak should be included, right? And the Gemara discusses this. The Gemara says, because you can't interrupt the whole parsha, but the question is still difficult. And the Parsha Shiur therefore says that it is a deeper reason why this parsha was that Chazal wanted to include this in our davening, and that's because of a pasuk in Haftorah from Micha. The pasuk says in Haftorah, "Ami zecharna ma'yoatz Balak melech Moav." Remember what Balak, the king of Moav, advised. So Bilam ben Ba'ar min Hashittim, and what Bilam ben Ba'ar responded min Hashittim at Gilgal, leman das tzidkos Hashem, in order to know the righteousness of Hashem. That's the key words. Leman das tzidkos Hashem, to know the righteousness of Hashem. What is the idea to even suggest that Parshas Balak should be said twice a day, morning and evening? That should be part of our davening, and within a certain part of Kriya Shema. It is the uniqueness of this parsha, because through every other nace in the Torah, we have a direct Masorah from people who were eyewitnesses. They saw the miracles, they saw everything, they saw the Yeshuas Hashem, they saw the salvation of Hashem. This is the one instance where, without the Torah itself, we would be completely unaware of the whole story. We would never know that they had set out that this plan put in motion in order to destroy the Jewish people, right? We would never know about it. It's only because Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu to write it in the Torah that we become aware of the protection that Hashem had given us throughout our journey, right? It shows and demonstrates the depth of the love that Hashem has for us and for Klal Yisrael, in that sense, to a greater extent than those open miracles, those Nissim, right? But it enables us as well. That's the idea of Leman Das Tzidkos Hashem, to know the righteousness of Hashem. It gives us that gift of knowing the righteousness of Hashem. But what it also does is it demonstrates the power of the word with a capital W of the Torah itself. We have here the one instance in the Torah, if you like, where everything about it, the whole story, is only from the Torah. We only know about it from the Torah, right? So the very fact that we believe in the Torah, the very fact that we can say this is a Toras Emes on Parshas Balak as well, as we started the Chasam services, that's essential. If a person has a question over this parsha, then he has a question on the whole thing, shows our commitment to the ultimate word of Hashem. You know, we said the power of words. This parsha teaches the power of words. It teaches the power of what speech can do, what your words can do. But it also teaches you the power of the word of the Torah itself. It teaches us how, when we say Shema morning and evening, coming back to that connection the Gemara makes with the lion, the Bilam's comparing to getting up in the morning and going to bed at night, when we make that connection and we say and we talk about B'shach b'chov kumecha, and we say the Shema night and day, what we're doing is we are reaffirming our essential commitment to the truth of the Torah. That's a central part of what Shema is, of what we believe in, right? That's what we say. That's what we're saying. And there is no better example of that in this parsha, because this parsha only exists because of the Torah. It only exists because of the word of Hashem. Otherwise, we wouldn't even know its existence. So everything about this parsha, I think, both ways, both in terms of it teaches the importance of speech, the importance of how we use our words, how Balak is able to channel the difficult times that the Bnei Yisrael have had through their words. He's able to try and channel that into someone who can curse the Bnei Yisrael in that way. How Bilam's words, Bilam has to learn the lesson himself. The donkey tries to speak, but he's so blinded to the words of the donkey because he's so absorbed in self-interest. And ultimately, we also learn how the power of the words of the Torah themselves, they drive in every way what our dedication, our commitment to our emunah and to the Torah, and that's why Parshas Balak remains of such central importance. Have a good Shabbos. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Okay, have a good Shabbos.
Thank you very much. Good Shabbos, Rabbi. Be well.
Thank you.
Okay, pleasure. Bye.